My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask you for pardon of my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. Today the Church celebrates the feast of the Nativity of Saint John the Baptist, or to be more exact, the solemnity, which is a top-level feast. Now, normally this feast or solemnity is celebrated tomorrow, on the 24th of June, but since this year, the feast or solemnity of the Sacred Heart falls, and so we move this feast forward one day. The Nativity we celebrate today instead of tomorrow. And it is a very special feast because St. John the Baptist is no ordinary saint. And we could begin this time of prayer asking him to intercede for us, to help us to pray well and to be inspired by him and his feast day. Have you ever noticed, in fact, that the Church only celebrates 3 birthdays each year? 2 you know very well, Jesus on the 25th of December, Our Lady on the 8th of September, and then this one, the Nativity of John the Baptist. Why do we do that? Well, when God sent the angel Gabriel to Our Lady, asking her to accept the vocation to be the Mother of God, to conceive Jesus in her womb, at the same time he told her that your cousin Elizabeth is in her 6th month. So we know that John the Baptist is born 6 months before his cousin. But why don't we celebrate the birthdays of any of the other saints? Why just Our Lady and John the Baptist? Well, again, there's another bit of evidence in the Gospel, and it's just after the Annunciation, when Mary rushes very quickly to help her cousin Elizabeth, to help in her pregnancy, because she's rather advanced in years. And after Mary greets Elizabeth, when she gets there, Elizabeth exclaims that the child in her womb, John the Baptist, had jumped for joy. He recognizes Jesus. And it is as if this is his baptism. He's sanctified in the womb, and so is born already a child of God. He's born holy, not really needing a further baptism. Just like Our Lady, of course, who's born immaculate, and Jesus, who is holiness itself. And remember, John's speciality is baptism. He, of all people, would have a really deep appreciation of what it means to have all your sins washed away in baptism, because he had this very special kind of baptism, as it were. Let's think today of our own baptism and thank God for that wonderful event, perhaps the most wonderful event in my existence. But there's another special thing about John and his birthday. And again, it's no accident that today's birthday coincides almost exactly with the summer solstice. That's the longest day of the year, at least here in the Northern Hemisphere. Just as Jesus' birthday is almost exactly at the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. So from now on in Israel and the whole Northern Hemisphere, the days will be getting shorter and shorter until midwinter, the time of the birth of Jesus, when the days are at their very shortest. So, what's so special about this? Well, in a word, humility. But what does this have to do with the days getting shorter? Well, John the Baptist is, we could say, super humble. All he wants to do is to get smaller and smaller, to make way for the Messiah. And he has a saying that reflects this very nicely. It's almost like a motto for John the Baptist. He, Jesus, he must increase and I must decrease. And so what John is clearly saying is, I'm like these days that are, from the time of my birth, getting smaller and smaller and smaller until Jesus arrives when they're at their very smallest. I must decrease, he must increase. And this humility of John the Baptist makes him very special in the eyes of God, who likes nothing more than humility. For John, his humility is not just his nice motto, but it's reflected in certain things that he does. For example, when Jesus begins preaching, John the Baptist already has a huge following in Israel. And people are even wondering, is this guy the Messiah? Well, he leaves it in no doubt. He is not the Messiah. And when his own beloved disciples and the people, the crowds, start following Jesus instead of him, he doesn't get in a huff like maybe you or I would get in a huff. We start losing our followers, our friends, to somebody else. In fact, he's delighted. And he tells people, do go. I'm not worthy to even undo his sandal straps. I'm nothing in comparison with him. Such humility. Also, he lives a very humble lifestyle. He's not bothered that he dresses in very humble clothes. He's got a camel hair, maybe it's like a camel hair onesie, and it's not from Gucci. It's a very primitive kind of dress. And this is another sign of his humility, because sometimes it's a real sign of pride to be ashamed of not having more fashionable clothes or possessions. But not so with John. He's quite happy. But at the same time, there's another very important thing about his humility. Because sometimes you and I, we think that humility means to be very timid, to be a bit of a pushover, not to stand up for our rights. But that's not the case with John the Baptist. He is no shrinking violet, far from it. We see in the Gospel, and this is what leads to his martyrdom, which is another feast of John the Baptist during the year, he's so courageous that he stands up to the man who must be one of the most kind of fearful men in all of Israel. And that's King Herod Antipas, son of the other King Herod. And he's a chip off the old block, is King Herod Antipas. He's a pretty violent man. And his wife, or his concubine, is not much better. Maybe she's in fact worse. But he has no problem telling King Herod that he is misbehaving, because the woman he has is not really his wife. And he says it, and he says it very frankly to King Herod. And eventually, because of that woman, he eventually is beheaded in prison. But that takes tremendous courage, the courage of John the Baptist. So very humble. He doesn't mind losing his followers. In fact, he wants that. He doesn't look for the adulation. He's directing people. He's saying, I'm only a sound. I'm only a voice crying in the wilderness. But Jesus is the one you should be seeking. So it's tremendous humility. But at the same time, he is a strong man. And he is able to say things to people. Imagine he says it very nicely, I suppose, but very clearly. He says it to King Herod Antipas. We think how Jesus must have really loved and admired his cousin John the Baptist. We see that once he's martyred, it does seem that Jesus is kind of particularly upset by that. We can imagine that Jesus is very impressed by the perfect humility of his cousin John the Baptist. A wonderful example of humility. So let's try to emulate or imitate John the Baptist in that humility, even in those three things, that we're not looking for that popularity. And if somebody's more popular than me, especially with Jesus, we say, fantastic, he must increase, I must decrease. That we wouldn't be ashamed that we perhaps don't have certain clothes, we don't have certain possessions. Fine, it doesn't matter. And then thirdly, that our humility doesn't make us timid. We have to speak up. We have to defend the truth, or be a witness to Christ, be a witness to our being Christians. Well, that we there would be strong, and that is also humility. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask you for help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.